Hey everybody, JJ Cooper, Austin Yamada here. Another of these Baseball America 2025 MLB Prospect Deep Dives. We're almost done, and we've saved one of the most interesting teams to me for one of the last teams we do. Seattle Mariners. Austin does our Mariners top 30. I would say one of the best top 10s that we're going to see in any of these organizations that we did. And we'll also say that it's a top heavy system. You would much rather have a top heavy system than a bottom heavy system. It's a top heavy system. But Austin, just kind of great to see you diving in. I feel like this is one of those teams where there is a clear number one here, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are all guys who you'd be like, if that was the number one prospect in your organization, you're doing okay. What is it about Colt Emerson that kind of helps him stand out on a group of prospects, a number of whom are also in the top 100?
Yeah, so I think everybody else is interesting, but a lot of them have sort of like a flaw you can pick at, and I just don't really think there is one with Emerson. He's young for level and he's moving through. He could get to the majors by 22. Doesn't seem unreasonable, and it's just a really safe comment. Like there's nothing that he doesn't do at the plate. He hits for average. He gets on base. He doesn't strike out. He makes a lot of solid contact, and I think at least you're getting at least doubles power with the hope that he grows into more over the fence power. And he's still young, and I think pretty much every scout you talk to believes that the power will come. And it's not like he's not impacting the ball. He's just not, hasn't led to over the fence home runs so far. I comped him to Chase Headley, and I think that's sort of outside of Headley's, MVP type season. He didn't hit for a ton of power, and he was still a really valuable player. And I think even if you say, okay, Emerson's not hitting for a ton of power, he's going to move to a corner. That's still a super, like Chase Headley was a really, really good player for many years. And that's like a third baseman that hits for below average for the position power. And then you talked about, Chase Headley was a late bloomer. Emerson is going to be young and get there really quick. And then you talk on top of that, he could add the power. And then you add all that together and all the reports so that it's incredible makeup. Everybody I talked to at the Mariners said that the makeup stood out in the pre-draft process and all the way since, till now, since he's been in the org, he's been nothing but good and inquisitive and, hardworking, curious. So yeah, I think just a combination of safety with sort of this upper bounds if he hits for more power, because everything else is good and there's just no flaws. We can dive into the other prospects, but everyone else has some.
I want to camp out on Emerson for a little while longer because I want to throw another comp out there that Mariners fans like. I'm not saying they're the same player, and they obviously they came in different kind of paths and all that, but it does, I do remember with Kyle Seager. Kyle Seager did not hit for a ton of power when he was in the minors. I think you could say, well, he had 14 homers. Yeah, playing at High Desert. But his first year, I think he hit one. His, when he was in Tacoma, I think, in Jackson, it was like 3 Tacoma, 4 in Jackson. I don't mean you put it all together. He was a guy who always could hit and the power came. Emerson's younger, much younger. Emerson's basically younger than when Seager was drafted. But the thing that stands out to me is like you said, if you have this foundation of good swing decisions, hitting the ball hard, using the whole field, doing all these things well at the plate, recognizing pitches. If you said, oh, the last to-do list item here is hitting the ball in the air to your pull side to get to home run power more often, I would much rather have that be the last attribute, especially for a very young player, than it's well, he hits the ball really hard. I mean, I just recorded a Nationals podcast recently with Savannah from our staff, and we were talking about Elijah Green. And Elijah Green hits the ball 116 miles an hour when he hits it. The problem is he strikes out 205 times, 206 times in a season also. Emerson, as you said, the power probably will come, but even if it didn't, everything else here is good enough where I'd be like, okay, he's still a really good player, even if this was a guy who was going to max out at 10, 12 home runs in the big leagues, wouldn't he?
Yeah. So I think, obviously, if you were to ask the Mariners, would you take a Kyle Seager career for Colt Emerson? I think everyone would say, not a Hall of Famer, but, close-ish. Like I think you would take any
He's a
prospect
Mariners Hall of Famer. If the
Right,
Mariners
right.
have a Hall of Fame, Kyle Seager's in it.
Right. And so I don't mean to demean Kyle Seager in any way, because I think if Emerson turned into Seager, that'd be a fantastic outcome. But I think there's, additional reasons to like Emerson even more than the Seager, the prospect, for reasons that you talked about. So there's the age, obviously. Another one is kind of that, like, Kyle Seager, although he had a plus hit tool without as much power coming up, it was always sort of like a bit of an uphill grooved swing. And I think with Emerson, it's a much more flat bat path. And like, there's more reasons to think that, like, Seager hit for average before he hit for power, but he sort of traded power for average, right? He started upping the fly ball rate. His BABIPs were always really low. Like, for a guy with a plus hit tool, Kyle Seager never hit for a high average in the majors. He was consistently, 220 to 260.
250, 260.
Yeah, with a lot of fly balls. And I think what's exciting about Emerson is that even in pro ball, he's shown the ability to hit the ball hard on a line, use the whole field. And so I think if the power comes, it won't be as much of a trade-off for the average that Seager sort of had to make this trade. And I think that Emerson has the chance to add some power without I think Emerson, I would project to hit for an above league average batting average with or without the power.
You mentioned about defensively. Long term, there are a lot of Mariners position prospects who you could position and say, okay, this guy has a very good chance to pencil into the lineup in 26 or 27. Looking at this, though, a lot of infielders. Is Emerson, is he the best fit at third base because he should be a really good defensive third baseman? Or is he the best fit at them for third base because when you got a bat like this, if he can play third base, then just put him there and let him mash? Like, defensively, what is kind of the upside? What's the realistic likely outcome for Emerson?
Yeah, so I think despite the Mariners having so many shortstop prospects, even if you count Ty Pete and who's been moved to the outfield, and then you have Arroyo and Celestin and Cole Young and Emerson, like, they're all playing shortstop right now, but most of them I don't think you would project as a dynamic shortstop. And I think it's not that Emerson is a bad shortstop. I think his tools are just very ordinary, and his athleticism.
He's not dynamic.
He's not.
He's not flashy. He's not twitchy.
No. Right. He's just very safe. He has a nice solid base, but he's not. There's no twitch there. It would be hard to see him making those, what you would call it, 3, 4, 5-star plays at the major league level. The plays that are right at the fringe of makeable, especially as the clock speeds up. I don't think he makes those. And so, especially early in his career, could you stick him at shortstop? I think you could. But the odds that he's on a team with a better defensive shortstop are very, very high. That someone's going to come along who's better. His arm's fine, his accuracy's fine, his hands are pretty good. I think you want a shortstop that can make the plays that he just is not even capable of making. In the 5-6 hole, or beating a 70 runner, those kinds of things.
Is there, for all these, again, there are a lot of really interesting shortstop prospects in the Mariners system right now. Are any of these long-term fit that description you just said? Like you said, I would say that we could say that about Cole Young. I would say that we could say that about Michael Arroyo. Is Celestin the guy? Is there a guy here you say, no, that's a shortstop and he's probably good enough that you're just going to keep him at shortstop all the way through? Or is this a team, an organization filled with a lot of second baseman, third baseman who could play shortstop, but you hope you have someone better?
I think Celestin is the only one that I would project as a future shortstop. And I'm not sure that I wouldn't project him as an above average one, but I think he's more than capable every day at shortstop. I think he has the best tools of the bunch. He's probably the most inconsistent right now, but he's super young and he's missed a lot of time. And give me the guy that is capable of making the outer bounds of the plays, of the more difficult plays on the spectrum, then, and especially at age 17, 18. Yeah. So I would say the other ones.
That's where the guys who can make that plays at 17, 18, them adding the consistency at it is way easier than the guy who's consistent adding the ability to make the highlight play.
Yep, agree there. So I would say I think Arroyo, could be a pretty below, it would hurt you at shortstop in the major league level. I think the others could stand there. but I would not project any of them as their mode outcome being a shortstop outside of Celestin.
So Colt Emerson's, I think, the clear one, as you laid out here.
Yep.
After that, I kind of feel like you could line up two through what on this list could kind of work out in a variety of different combinations, depending on what you want to emphasize, what you want to prefer. Is that, for one, am I fair in saying that? But like, I just kind of look at it, and having talked to you about this list, you just mentioned Celestin. I probably wouldn't put Celestin 2 right now, but you just laid out, like, if you really like upside, you could make the case. Is that 2 through 5 kind of a jumble? 2 through 4, where you could argue Michael Arroyo at 2? Like, how does this kind of set up behind Emerson at the 2 through whatever rankings on here?
I was going to say 2 through 9, actually.
Wow.
Just looking at I think Locklear at 10 did appear on our top 100 at various points mid-season, but I think he's kind of below that other tier. But I think 2 through 9, you could find respected opinions in the industry that would take them there. It's not really a knock on 2 and 3, more so as it is sort of like praise for 7, 8, 9. There are plenty of people who love Logan Evans at 8. We can talk about Ryan Sloan later at 9. Laz Montes, I think some of the feedback internally and around the league pushed him down, but I believe at some point in our discussions early, we had Montes in that 2 or 3 range on our first draft. So we can talk about whoever you want to talk about, but
I was saying, like, if Johnny Farmelo hadn't blown out his knee, he very possibly would be 2 on this list. But okay, so again, we've talked about this some. You're doing the reporting on this. Cole Young ended up at 2. I want to ask you about Cole Young and Michael Arroyo, because I feel like if you just said, if this was just the Austin Yamada list, might be Michael Arroyo at 2. So make what led to what stands out about Cole Young, but then also I want you to kind of get a chance to talk also about, okay, well, what is it about Arroyo that really stands out as well? And by the way, Michael Arroyo, who, if you haven't checked out at baseballamerica.com, our fantasy coverage, we do a Robo Scout Top 100, which is a completely data-driven, looking at data, like analytical data, age, trying to do a lot of what MLB teams do with modeling that Dylan White does an incredible job with. And on that, when we say that Michael Arroyo's 2, Michael Arroyo's 2 on that. He's number 2 on the top 100. Like, the underlying data on Michael Arroyo is such that the Robo Scout Top 100 has Michael Arroyo number 2 in all of baseball. So that was a very long preamble, but I'll kind of lead into what is it about Young and what is it about Arroyo that really stand out?
Yeah, so I think with Cole Young, I ended up with him at 2, sort of out of deference to sort of his pedigree and the scouts I talked to, the evaluators I talked to, in the industry and with the Mariners. It was pretty hard to, to find someone who would have Arroyo over Young. And I do think there are aspects about Young that, exceed those of Arroyo. One being, I think there's almost no chance Arroyo can stick it short. And I'm not even sure he's an average defender at second. I think he might be a below average defender at second. Even if he never bolts up, he just sort of like the hip mobility, the lateral movements. He's just not really, even the wingspan and sort of like the length that Arroyo has, he's just not covering a lot of ground. And I think Cole Young can stand it short and would be an above average defender at second. And so like that defensive piece is already a big leg up. Another one is that Young is a year older, but he's also a level higher, and he did the AA jump already. And we've talked about the high
A. Checked off the AA box,
right? Which is such a big, the high A to AA jump is big. And so, like, just if we're talking about certainty of information, maybe a year from now, Arroyo will rank higher than Cole Young is now, but Cole Young's already done it, and he's already held his own at AA as one of the youngest regulars. So I think what's good about both of them is their sort of adaptability. Even when they get punched in the mouth early, and not even punched in the mouth, like Arroyo was struggled for his standards to start the year, but it was fine. And then he just lit it up.
He wasn't hitting $180 or something.
Right.
Going, what is he doing in low A?
Right. But they both, I think, figure out the league as they sort of, you can kind of feel okay throwing them into deep waters and feel like they're going to sort of figure it out. We'll talk about Arroyo in a sec. I think he's a more well-rounded bat. and I think most people would take his bat. But Cole Young has always been the guy that had the quote unquote special hit tool. He may not have the power of Arroyo. You could say that his hit tool is a bit cheaty. Like he's not trying to sell out for damage. He does try and put the ball in play. He does try and kind of find those donuts, the shallow center, shallow left donuts. But he has enough, raw batting practice power that you can't just play like him like Juan Pierre and bring the infield in. And so like I do think the ability to find those bloopers is a real thing. He uses the whole field. He's completely unshiftable against. So I think, you just combine sort of what he's done in pro ball at young levels and what the amateur scouts thought and what the scouts continue to see as far as his hit tool goes. And then even in sort of some showcases or some all-star games or just when he faces good competition, he's still putting together quality at bats. I think you're buying the hit tool. And I think most people would say that if they could choose one of the 5 tools to be most sure about, it would be the hit tool. So I think you talk about a middle infielder who's, like 21 at AA and has a plus or better hit tool. It's really hard for that player to not be a quality major leaguer, right? They may not be a star. They might just be Adam Frazier, but Adam Frazier is a really good player. Like it's hard for that player to fail.
Could we stop and hang out on that for a second? Because you've been doing this for a while and you've done this for teams. I've been doing this for a while for Baseball America, more years than I'd like to admit. And when I look back on it, what you said, like when you talked about Chase Headley earlier, I do feel like among fans, there's like someone may have heard that and said, Colt Emerson's a top 25 prospect. He's Chase Headley. It's like there's always this kind of like expectation, hope, belief, desire that like every top 25 prospect's going to become Mike Trout, which is utterly unrealistic. But the other thing that stands out about this is it's like, as I've looked at this over the years, you just hit on it. Middle infielders who can hit are the guys who I look back on year after, time after time where I'm like you said, Adam Frazier. Adam Frazier's been a really good player. Ketel Marte, is a guy who has been around for quite a while. And then you look at it and you're like, wow, he's had a great career. Like a lot of these guys, that's one of the things that this organization really is heavy on right now. But hit first middle infielders just have a lot of different ways that they can help a team and they can kind of be sneaky good for a long time, can't they? Where it's like, oh, I didn't realize that guy compiled 15 WAR, 20 career WAR, had a couple of 3 WAR seasons where you're like, I didn't even, he's never an all-star even, but there's just so many more options, I feel like, for those kind of guys than there is for the guy who's like, he's got some power, but he's really not good in the outfield. He doesn't run. Those guys, it's a much narrower path, I feel like, a lot of times. What do you think?
It is. And also I think if your everyday first baseman goes down in June, being able to find off the waivers or find your quad A hitter that can kind of put together 80% of that, production isn't as hard or not as costly midseason, where like Adeiny Echeverria was not really a major league player, but he would get signed to a minor league contract every single year because when your middle fielder gets hurt midseason, it's not easy to find these guys that won't kill you. They just don't grow on trees.
I think Edwin Arroyo, the Mariners, former Mariner, now Reds prospect, is one of these where it's like, if the Reds had with Ellie, if you get to midseason and someone has an injury at shortstop, it wouldn't, I don't know if someone who's contending would want to go to a rookie, but it's like just being able to play shortstop competently that is something that is in short supply when an injury happens, I feel like.
Yeah. So I think the scarcity there is a big thing. And I think that's kind of a segue into Michael Arroyo and sort of that discussion, because I think they're very different players. We just talked about Cole Young. I think Arroyo is a monopositional second base. Like he can't play third. He can't play short. I wouldn't want to put him in the outfield. It would destroy his value if you played him in left. So he's just a second baseman. But like he's so young and the bat is so special. Like you can't really poke a hole in anything. In fact, you could even argue that his like strikeout rates thus far have been elevated because he's seen so many pitches, and like his contact rates are not that bad. Like you could even argue that like he could be kind of like a 10% walk, 20% K guy at the major league level with average and with power. And one more thing I want to talk about with the hit tool is that I don't think, hit tool manifests itself most closely to batting average. And I don't think that the hit tool / batting average component itself is that valuable as far as major league WAR goes. But you want a plus hit tool because it goes along with so many other things, right? As a prospect, right? The guy that has a good hit tool probably sees the ball well. He probably has good bat control. He probably has a higher ceiling to start getting, you tell him to get to his elevated launch angles. It's not every hitter can just change the launch angle profile. Part of it has to do with their bat plane. Part of it has to do with their like distribution of sort of like not just average launch angle, but sort of their spread, right? And so like being able to just put barrel on the ball, it sort of translates into other things. And I think Arroyo maybe doesn't have this quote unquote special hit tool, but he already has above average hit, power, and zone control. Everything you already need. There's nothing you need to change with Michael Arroyo. You don't have to hope he adds anything. You just hope that he continues to hit the way he has been at every single level of his career. Like he's never not hit, and he's 19, 20 years old.
Coming out of Columbia also, not coming out of, a traditional. Columbia's getting better and better baseball-wise, but not somewhere where you the same kind of background as like a player coming out of a U.S. high school or the Dominican, for that matter, Venezuela.
Yep, that's another good point. And then on top of that, I think a lot of sharper evaluators and I share this belief that if you could choose a player with small levers and plus power, or a guy with big levers and plus power, you would always take the same amount of power with smaller levers. There's fewer holes. They're not exploitable. You can't beat them inside. Just the ability to generate the same amount of power from a smaller, shorter, more explosive package is a huge plus. And Arroyo has that. Like it's really easy power. It's just really hard. Like I didn't even look at the projections you were talking about, right? The Robo Scout, and like it's hard to disagree if you're just reading the page and you see a 19-year-old doing all these things in full season ball that lights up every single category offensively. You would assume maybe he's not a scout guy, but then scouts go watch him and think this is a pretty swing, he can hit. So what's the issue? And I don't know what the issue is. He's just a really good prospect.
He's just a really good prospect. And that kind of leads into another good question to ask with the Mariners, which is, I do feel like the Mariners have this massive divide, which is, I get it that the fan base is kind of frustrated right now and the big league team needs to have more success. But at the same time, we look at this from a scouting player development side. This is a team that produced all these pitchers. Kirby, we could just go down the list. All these pitchers, and Julio Rodriguez and Cal Raleigh. And now here they are with this wave of hitters. We're going to ask and kind of dive into what is it that the Mariners are doing right on a scouting player development level right after this quick break. And we're back. So Austin, when you're looking, this is a very nice assemblage of infielders, mainly infielders, but positional players who in most cases have defensive value. There may be an exception or two there. We'll talk about Lazaro Montes in a little bit down the road, but with real offensive potential as well. And again, this is following on the heels. There's some pitchers here we want to talk about too. But what is it that's kind of working right here in the minor leagues for the Mariners? What is it that they've kind of hit on here that kind of, they've invested some resources here. There's a number of first round picks that we should be, that we're talking about. We're not talking about all like 15th round picks, but what is it that's led to this kind of wave of hitters where you say guy after guy, you're like, this guy can hit for average, makes good swing decisions. There's a chance for him to have defensive value. What are they doing right?
I think this is obvious, but their pitching pipeline is incredible and it feels pretty sustainable, both from the outside and from the inside. It does feel like they've sort of solved pitching design and pitching development and sort of they know the right axes and the right shapes, that are most effective for pitches. So, and I think that's an underrated part, right? Like you, especially when you're drafting a high school pitcher who's 19 and you have time to sort of mold them into what, like being able to tweak their pitch axis and sort of like, if it rides true vertical versus sort of this generic, up and away shape, like that is a huge difference. And it's very imperceptible that some orgs just haven't figured out yet. And they also know it's not cookie cutter. So they don't make every single pitcher throw the same way, right? They have these sort of target shapes and, this pitcher has this pitch shape. Let's go find a comp of a pitch shape that works really well in the majors and try and get into those pitch shapes. And then I think they also have a really good sort of training, player development, et cetera, not just on the mental side of the, of strategy side of things, but also just making sure that they're developing and eating right and all these other things, both from the pitching prospects and then the guys they take. We see them, minor league free agents and off the waivers that they turn into quality relievers. It does feel like the Mariners are sort of the cutting edge of pitching design. I think if you were talking about pitching development, they're probably in the top 3 organizations in the majors. And you see lots of sort of, if you're a minor league pitcher or you're a pitcher that has to take a minor league deal and you have a bunch of offers to choose from, a lot of them want to go pitch for the Mariners because there's opportunity and because there's a historical precedence of them sort of developing. As far as hitters go, like you said, they have a lot of good offensive prospects, but I don't think the track record is quite as stellar. It's mixed. They've had, like you said, Cal Raleigh and Julio Rodriguez, but they've also had guys like Evan White, and right that didn't pan out. And so I think it's still the jury's to be seen on how that is, and also just sort of the park effects of, is it the park effect? Is it a lack of development? It's really hard to say like what is what, but we do know that both prospects and a lot of major league hitters with proven track records have come to the Mariners and sort of had career worst seasons immediately after going over. So it's really hard to say with these young crop of infield prospects, who's going to pan out. A couple of reasons for optimism, or a couple credits I have to give. They've been really good on the international side, on the offensive side of, like you talk about Frankie Thon and his staff and what they've done. They've hit on almost every top dollar sign, outside of Starlin Aguilar. I think pretty much every top dollar, and they got Gabby Gonzalez in that class too. And if you talk about all the $1 million plus signs, or all the top 2 signs out of each international class, Celestin, Montes, Julio Rodriguez, Gabby Gonzalez, and you just go on and on. They've done really well. They've hit on all of their top signs. On the domestic side, they haven't had quite as much success, but they've taken a lot of high school position players lately. And so far, like, they're all, you talked about Farmelo and Ty Pete and Harry Ford and Cole Young, Colt Emerson. It goes on and on. Like, these all look promising thus far. And one thing to note is the Mariners are big about knowing the demographic. Like they talk about, okay, a high school player here is less sure, historically is less sure than a college guy. So if we're going to take a high school guy early, we better really like him. And the fact that they're taking these guys, despite being one of the demographic heavy teams, tells you that the high school players that they're taking, they really, really like. These aren't just kind of tied at the top of the board. They really stand out for some reasons.
That kind of, again, we could really camp out on that, but I want to kind of keep going on guys because there's so many interesting guys here. Like you mentioned, Lazaro Montes. If it all breaks, if it all clicks for him, this is a really special bat, is it not? But there's also some, it's a narrow path for a player like Montes, much more so, I would say, than a lot of these other prospects we're talking about, because of the fact that in Montes's case, the value is going to be very largely tied up in the bat, right?
Yeah. So let's just run through Montes real quick, because I think there were a lot of pros and a lot of cons. And I think the pros are obviously the size, the power, and the on-base percent. Like, he has a really good eye, and pitchers are scared to face him. And he whiffs so much that he goes into deep counts and he sees 5-6 pitches at bat. So like, I think the walks will always be there. I think he's always going to be a high on-base guy, and I think the power is always going to be there. And then the last positive I would say is, despite him running what we would project always be a high strikeout rate, the batting average may not be quite as bad as you think, because he hits the ball so hard when he makes contact that he's going to run high BABIPs. So like, for a guy that might strike out 28 to 30% of the time, it'll be a poor batting average, but it won't be, bottom of the barrel, because when he is making contact, it's really hard to defend.
He hits the ball through fielders sometimes, yes. Even though he's not a runner, he literally hits the ball so hard that it's like, yeah, I couldn't get that, even though it was hit at me.
Yes, exactly. So I think those are the pros. And I think as this game has trended more towards pitching heavy in the last few years, sort of like these old, Edwin Encarnacion types that were a really good bat but didn't have any defensive value, they're more valuable in today's game than they were when during the late steroid, when it was a dime a dozen. Like offense is back to being a premium. And I think if you can find the guy that's that's an OPS mid 800s, that's around a 125 WRC plus. It almost doesn't matter where he plays because those guys are hard to find.
Jordan Alvarez,
But
is the extreme example of this, right? In that if you are one of the best hitters in baseball, you can just DH and be really, really valuable.
Yes. But if I can talk about the cons real quick,
but that gets us to the next part.
Yeah. So he's playing some corner outfield right now, and he actually lost some weight this past season. He got in better shape this past season, and I think that's the good sign is that he knows he's trying to work on it. But the defense still wasn't great. Even in his more svelte shape, he's not a runner. He's not an athlete. He doesn't read the ball as well. He is kind of like heavy feet that tangle easily, and I don't think he's a corner outfield long term. I think maybe he can play first base, but also he might
big
just
enough target.
Yeah. But there's no quality that he has defensively that wouldn't even make you say other than that he can't play anywhere else and that he's big, that like he's necessarily even a good first. Like we have no evidence that he can pick balls and he can cover the line. Like we don't know yet. He's just been like corner outfield. So like for all we know, he might just be a future DH. And then a guy that a lefty big guy that you could match up against him. He's going to strike out a lot. He's not going to provide any defensive value. That then you sort of start narrowing the path where, okay, well, how does he become a 3-1 guy? It's pretty tough.
The flip side of that is I feel like that the player in this top 10 that you might be the most excited about, and there's a lot of, but that is really interesting, is who's number 9 on this list, Ryan Sloan. You said that anyone from 2 to 9, you could make the case. So what's the case for who's a very young high school pitching prospect who was just recently drafted, Ryan Sloan?
Yeah, so we've been at BA. We were aggressive with him, right? We put him over the first rounder, Gerangelo Cinci, who we're not low. There's no reason to dislike Cinci based on anything that's happened thus far, but we have Sloan over him. So I think we were aggressive in the placement, but at the same time, for a guy that hasn't really done anything in pro ball yet, so from a demographic that a high school right-handed pitcher, it's pretty irresponsible to move him any higher than we can. And it's a really good system, like you said. All these guys are top 100 kind of guys, but the fact that he's even in here sort of shows how good he can be. And if you asked me which prospect from here has the best chance at jumping into the top 50 league wide next year, I think I would say Sloan, because he kind of has it all. He's got the prototypical starter pitcher body. He has legitimately 3 present plus pitches. There's no projection necessary. The fastball, the breaking ball, and the changeup are all plus or better. It's a well-rounded repertoire that can get righties out, can get lefties out. We haven't seen enough innings to know what the strike throwing is going to be, but based on high school and showcase stuff, he's been around the zone. It's not a crazy delivery. There's no reason why he couldn't throw strikes or why we would think he won't throw strikes. And then, the makeup checks out. So, and then beyond that, the Mariners just had Sloan sort of throwing pens after they drafted him, and it's been rave review after rave review. So, I don't think the word has gotten. I don't think enough rival teams have seen him at a competitive setting yet. But I think once maybe by the time he throws his first pitch in 2025, the cat might be out of the bag. This is just as good as it gets.
He is one of my targets when I go to Arizona for spring training. He's one of the guys that I have on my must-see list, or as best I can, because it sounds really interesting. We like to always wrap this up with, and this is a system where I don't think you're going to be digging too far into the deep ends of this. Like before we get to our non-top 10 prospect to watch, I think it's worth noting on this, we have raved about this top 10. This is a really good top 10. As you noted, we didn't even get to their first round pick, who didn't crack the top 10, not because Cinci doesn't look good, just because that's how deep this top 10 is. But it feels like you get to Jeter Martinez at 15. And then there's like this gap, I feel like, going beyond that. Like, this is a system that we talked about this it's top heavy, but we're going to talk about the Marlins on another one of these deep dives. You did the Marlins list as well. Look at this Mariners list. The difference between the top of this list and the back of the list does seem really stark.
It does. And I think part of that is sort of them, going for big bonus guys at the top. And part of it is sort of allocating their international bonus pool in a way where there's a lot of high dollar signs at the top, and they've hit on those. But then I think also part of it is trades and lack of development of sort of like their peripheral prospects. So it's hard to pinpoint one reason, but it does feel like they've sort of emptied out, or the guys have regressed sort of in that 16 to 30 range. I would put the exact same stopping point where, like you said, Jeter Martinez is really interesting, and then from 15 to 16 and on, it's not a lot of guys that you would project to be on roster all season at their ceiling.
So who is a non-top 10 prospect that's interesting, one that fans should keep an eye on?
Yes. I have three names to run through real quick. Brandon Garcia at 12. Really good fastball slider combo. It's basically just a 2-pitch guy. So, like, do you believe he can start long term like this? He could be Oliver Perez, but there's some buzz that the Mariners may just take it for what it is now, bird in the hand, and have him break camp on the major league roster as a reliever. And that doesn't mean he can't ever start, but once you sort of go to the majors as a reliever, it's
Good
kind
at
of hard
that,
to.
they usually let you just keep doing that.
Yeah, and so I think he could start. I don't really know. Actually, his changeup is interesting, but it lacks command at times. I think he could just be a fastball breaking ball guy out of the pen and be someone that you can see immediately. Another guy, like you said, at 15, Jeter Martinez. So very projectable, sort of a scout's dream. Deep bag, mid-90s fastball, really good frame, young. The reason he's not higher is because he had a big walk spike last year. He was walking 7 per 9. No one that I've talked to with the Mariners or with another evaluator with other teams, nor me when I was looking at the video, are like particularly concerned. Like, he has a smooth operation. He's never had strike throwing concerns in the past, so we hope it's just a blip. But it's hard to sort of ignore that many walks. And then just to give you one name outside of the top 15, Blas Castano, number 22, is not a traditional real high upside prospect. He's actually a guy that got released by the Yankees midseason last year and then signed to a minor league deal. But he will almost certainly contribute next year. And not in this sort of fill-in guy. Like, he could be a legitimate 4 or 5 starter down the road, or the Swiss Army knife that can come out of the pen and is a legitimate major league contributor. Sinker slider guy with really good shapes and throws enough strikes, and actually has, for what he sounds like, this journeyman, he throws pretty hard. Like, he can touch 97. Like, he's not a soft tosser. Not a huge strikeout rate. Probably not going to be an upper half rotation starter, but just look for a guy in Castano that will probably contribute immediately this year.
A lot of great names. We appreciate the time, Austin. We hope you enjoyed this. If you do enjoy these deep dives, we have a whole lot of these on the Baseball America YouTube channel, including we have a playlist that has all these. So if you're any of that you've missed, we almost are through all 30 teams. We're not through all 30 yet, but we're close. So if you don't see your team, don't worry, it's coming. But for most teams now, we do have them. So for Austin, I'm JJ. So long, everybody.